don't see the Iranian-Israeli conflict at this point as being in a category of win on either side or loss on either side. I think it's very clear that Gaza has been a catastrophe for the Israeli Defense Force. Clearly, that is a failure. The mission to eradicate, root out, and destroy Hamas has failed. And using that as a pretext to drive millions of people out of their homes and away from Israel because they're Arabs, Muslim, or Christian has failed. The issue with Iran, I think, is unresolved. The Iranians demonstrated it with their response to the Israeli airstrike that they can reach critical and sensitive targets inside Israel, and that potentially they could destroy much of the country. That much is achieved. The Israelis did not respond, and I'm not sure that I or anyone else who has not sat in on the meetings at the highest levels can completely explain that. But I don't think it's over. And I think it would be a mistake to assume that Mr. Netanyahu has decided, okay, we won't bother with Iran anymore. No, I think very differently. He still has substantial American military power in the region to which he has access. He still has considerable capability of his own. And he may decide at some point that it's time to take action against Iran. And as we've seen today, there's more fighting in southern Lebanon. And if that escalates, then Iran is clearly back in the target area, because without Iran, Hezbollah could not survive. It probably could not even exist.
Talking about Hezbollah, here's John Sowers, who's the former head of MI6, with some very interesting advice to Prime Minister Netanyahu, basically saying, why don't you just leave Gaza and declare it a victory, even though you didn't win, and concentrate your efforts on Hezbollah. Well, listen to this. Very interesting. Cut number 9, Chris.
This general is saying that you have to finish the job in Gaza. I'm not so sure about that, actually. I think Israel succeeded in reducing Gaza to rubble.
Is that a success?
Well, exactly. That's not exactly a success. They haven't secured the release of the remaining hostages who are still alive. They haven't killed the Hamas commanders. They've caused enormous amounts of humanitarian suffering. Frankly, I think from the Israeli point of view, they can change the subject. They can switch to Iran and Hezbollah and just call it a day in Gaza. I think that is conceivable. But the alternative, Christiane, is if the Israelis do go back in a big way into Rafah to take on the last of the Hamas battalions. Yes, there's a security logic to it, but will they actually achieve any more than they've achieved already?
Can they achieve any more than they've achieved already? Colonel?
I think that Mr. Netanyahu recognizes that they have thus far failed in Gaza. And remember that the ultimate goal or objective was not simply to destroy Hamas. That was a useful excuse. You cannot have Israel from Jordan to the sea unless you can drive the Arabs that live on the remaining lands that are technically either within Israel or immediately adjacent to it out of their homes, out of their towns, away from their farms, and into neighboring states. So if he doesn't do that, how does he get settlers, Israeli settlers, Israeli homeowners, Israeli occupants, inhabitants to go back to the places where they formerly lived in southern Israel? Well, he can't do that. The same holds true for northern Israel. But I would disagree with the intelligence chief, and I would argue that Gaza should be finished in some way. I would not do what Mr. Netanyahu has done. Obviously, I would seek some sort of alternative solution. But the notion of expanding the war to Hezbollah, a force that is not going to easily be defeated and could conceivably bring in Iran once again into the fight, is disastrous. It's very reminiscent of the decision to turn on the Soviet Union, with Great Britain sitting in the rear of the German Empire. Impossible. As long as Britain remained the unsinkable aircraft carrier, why would you take on the Soviet Union? It's foolhardy and stupid. And I think the same thing is true for Hezbollah.
If Israel takes on Hezbollah and Iran gets involved, what does Putin do?
Well, that's another factor in this equation. It's more than just a factor. It's a critical variable. Mr. Putin holds all the cards strategically behind the scenes in the Middle East right now. He's widely respected. He's always counseled restraint, patience, and in general, the states, the people in the region have taken his advice on board. He's held in very high esteem, as is Russia right now. In fact, if you look at it from the standpoint of a branding exercise, our brand is severely damaged. We look ridiculous, and Russia's brand is very strong and looks very, very appealing. I think that Mr. Putin, by placing additional Russian troops in Syria, having put Russian forces in the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean, as well as in the Mediterranean, has made it very clear how he feels and what he's prepared to do if, in fact, we and the Israelis decide to take on Iran. And that's why I say the notion of turning on Hezbollah right now makes a future collision with Iran inevitable. Why would you do that if you're interested in, first and foremost, ridding your country of Hamas? Well, I think Hamas is important, but it's a sideshow to Mr. Netanyahu. He wants his entire country to be, quote unquote, Arab freed. In order to achieve that end, he's got to defeat all of Israel's opponents in the region. That means a regional war. He can't do that without American support.
Here's John Sowers again arguing for the two-state solution, cut number 10.
I think Hamas will be able to reconstitute its military forces. There'll be plenty of volunteers for Hamas battalions emerging out of this conflict. And the only real answer to both Gaza and the West Bank is to have an authoritative Palestinian leadership which takes responsibility for those territories in the concept of a context of working towards a Palestinian state which lives alongside a secure and peaceful Israel.
Isn't that effectively impossible with the current leadership of the Israeli government and the attitude of the Israeli people post-October 7th?
Absolutely. Mr. Netanyahu has the backing of 80 to 85% of his population when it comes to this issue of the two-state solution. A Palestinian state on the borders of Israel, or containing or embracing parts of Israel, is, from the vantage point of the Israelis, the equivalent of setting up an organized crime state that will hold a knife to the throat of Jews in Israel in perpetuity. Remember, all of this is about vanquishing the enemies, the opponents of Israel, and destroying anyone who in their minds challenges or threatens Jews. That's why you continually hear in the American and Western press anyone who fails to support Israel unconditionally being called an anti-Semite. They have tried to identify anti-Semitism with being anti-Israeli. And so the idea of a separate, distinct state that legitimates the Arabs that live in Palestine in any way, shape, or form as deserving of such a state is unacceptable. They won't do it. So I think he's delusional. And as a result, the war goes on, and the war is not going to end nicely.
Colonel, in the last 48 hours, Columbia University and Yale University have suspended their live classes. They're all online. Harvard University has closed Harvard Yard. Columbia University has invited the New York City police onto the campus to arrest demonstrators. Nobody's been accused of violence. They're just accused of trespassing. Everybody who's been arrested is arguing from the river to the sea, Palestine should be free. Okay. Are you concerned about the freedom of speech in America, Colonel?
Oh, of course. I think the Bill of Rights in this country has been abused, if not widely ignored, in too many places. And across the country, we have people sitting in jail who were arrested, charged, and ultimately sentenced unfairly and unjustly, in my judgment, on the basis of January 6th. It's outrageous. And at the same time, we have justices all over the country releasing criminals into the streets. It doesn't make any sense. The world is turned upside down. And again, this goes back to the idea that you cannot attack, you cannot challenge anyone who takes the position that Israel is right and the rest of the world is wrong. And that's simply inconsistent with the Bill of Rights, and it violates everything that we historically have stood for. Remember, I think it was Jefferson who said, "I may not agree with you, but I will fight to the death for your right to disagree." That's been one of the things that separated us from so many other countries around the world for hundreds of years. We seem to have jettisoned that. Now we are passing legislation that creates categories of protected people. This is not good for national cohesion. It's not good for American society. I don't think it's good for Israel, frankly, but more important, I think it harms Jews all over the United States and the Western world.
Before we go, I'd like to go back to something you mentioned earlier, which is scary, actually, and that is and correct me if I'm mischaracterizing what you said, Colonel. We have given away so much of our substantial military equipment we might not have available for us what we might need if, God forbid, we need it. Okay.
That's absolutely right. You look at the loss rates in terms of equipment and people in the war between Ukraine and Russia. We neither have the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines on active duty to withstand those losses, nor do we have the backlog of stored equipment that could be opened and then rapidly redistributed to replace losses on the battlefield. What we've done is that we've sent almost everything we have across the sea to Ukraine. And now we've done the same thing with ammunition, particularly precision-guided missiles and precision-guided artillery, as well as spare parts to Israel. If we are suddenly called upon to fight a major war that would require us to fight on land, Americans need to understand that, contrary to popular belief, wars are generally not decided at sea or in the air. They're decided on land. And right now, we don't have the force structure, nor do we have the depth in the force to fight a major war on land anywhere. Perhaps in Texas against Mexico, but that's about it.
I realize the constitutional system provides for civilian control of the military, and that's a positive good. But do the people that wear the uniform understand and appreciate the dangers of the depletion of ammunition and equipment?
You know, I think they do, but they lived in a world where nothing they did seemed to matter for so long that I think they decided this doesn't matter either. I would compare it to the way we treat the national sovereign debt. People are raising the debt issue all the time. I think we're at 35 trillion now and climbing, and saying it doesn't matter. It doesn't make any difference. It hasn't made any difference yet. But with each passing day, we look carefully at the treasury market and we wonder how much longer that facade will be preserved. There are 100 other factors in the economy that have an impact. It's very fragile. It could fall apart quickly. Well, the same thing is true militarily. What looks from a distance strong and capable, once you get closer to it and then you hurl it into action, may not hold together at all. And right now, I think that's the case with us. And detecting this kind of rot in your military power is not as easy as it seems. And remember, you're dealing with a Congress that thinks its principal mission is to spend money. And they spend it, whether or not what they buy works, whether or not what they are supporting with their funds is effective. Excuse me. All shrinks to insignificance. What counts most of all is spending the money. Because if you don't spend the money, your constituents are unhappy, your donors are unhappy, and you are not going to last in office.